The first cold wind of autumn swept across the barren plains when he saw her again standing alone by her husband's unmarked grave. The grass around her boots bent beneath the wind's mournful howl, and the sky above wore the bruised colors of a fading storm. She didn't cry, not like the other widows did. She stood still, almost carved from stone, only her black veil trembling ever so slightly, as if caught between this world and the next. Elias Turner watched her from a distance, his gloved hands tightening around the reins. He had seen sorrow before. War had shown him enough to last a lifetime, but the weight she carried was different. Quiet, heavy, a sorrow she refused to share with anyone. Her name was May Harper, widow of Daniel Harper, a rancher who had died on a cold night under circumstances no one dared to speak of aloud. Folks gossiped anyway. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered of violence, but May never confirmed a word. She simply buried the man she once loved and walked through Dustwood like a ghost, trying not to disturb the living. Elias had met her only weeks earlier, when she stepped into the general store with a list of supplies written in handwriting too neat for a woman trembling inside. She kept her eyes down, but he had heard her breath catch just once when the wind slammed the door shut behind her. That was when he first noticed the bruise fading beneath her collar, a small thing, but it gnawed at him. He didn't ask. A cowboy learns early that a person's past is a sacred thing. But when their eyes met for the first time, he felt something shift inside him. Like her sadness had reached across the counter, wrapped itself around his ribs, and refused to let go. Now, standing near her husband's grave, she looked smaller than he remembered, fragile, but there was steel in the way she stood. A woman beaten by the world, perhaps, but not broken. Elias cleared his throat and rode closer, careful not to startle her. "Evening, ma'am." She didn't turn. "You shouldn't be here. I came to check on you." "I don't need checking on." Her voice cracked, though she tried hard to hide it. He dismounted, boots sinking into the cold earth. "May. Dustwood's not kind to a woman walking the world alone." Her jaw tightened. "Then I'll walk alone faster," he exhaled softly. She was stubborn, perhaps more than anyone he'd ever met. And yet beneath that stubbornness, he sensed a deep, trembling fear. Something or someone had driven her to this lonely hill. Something she would rather die than let catch up with her. "You left town before dawn," he said gently. "Someone might worry." "Nobody should." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Especially not you." Elias studied her hands, clenched, cold, trembling. She wasn't just grieving. She was preparing to leave. That satchel at her feet, packed and tied tight, told him everything. "You're running," he said. May closed her eyes. "Please, Elias, don't make me say it. I can see it clear as day." She finally looked at him then, her brown eyes glassy with fear. "Then hear me clearly. I don't want your help. I don't want anyone following me. You keep your distance, Elias Turner. For your own sake." He felt the words like a blade sliding into the softest part of his heart. But he kept his voice steady. "May, what are you running from?" Her breath caught a sound filled with too many memories. A man who doesn't stay buried. For a moment, the air around them stilled. Daniel Harper, her husband, the one lying beneath the grave at her feet. Elias's stomach dropped. "May, what are you saying?" She shook her head quickly, panicked. "I shouldn't have said that. Forget it. Forget all of this." She grabbed her satchel, swung it over her shoulder, and backed away from him. "I told you before, leave me be." Then she turned and walked toward the trail, disappearing into the valley, the wind whipping her black veil behind her like a dark banner. Elias watched her go, heart thundering. She was afraid, truly afraid, and running straight into danger. Every instinct in him screamed to let her go, respect her wishes, honor her words, but something stronger than fear pulled at him. A promise he hadn't spoken, but felt. As she disappeared into the canyon's shadows, Elias mounted his horse. "No, May," he whispered to the wind. "I won't leave you to face this alone." He tugged the reins and followed her trail, but he wasn't the only one. From the crest of the ridge, a second rider watched them both, silent, motionless, and waiting. And the moment Elias disappeared into the canyon, the stranger nudged his horse forward, following the same path, with a purpose far darker than love. The sun bled over the dusty rooftops of a town that time had all but forgotten. I stood beside the wagon, the morning air crisp and cold, my journey finally at an end. But a shock sent a tremor through me. Tucked into my father's belongings was a familiar leather tobacco pouch, one I hadn't seen in years. My hand closed around it, the worn leather a ghost of a memory. Across the street, a man named Elias watched me, his gaze as silent and steady as the mountains on the horizon. I walked toward him, a question burning on my lips. "Did you know him?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't answer, just looked away, his expression troubled. With a heavy sigh, he turned and walked toward the stables, the silence stretching between us. We rode out of town together, the rhythm of the horses' hooves the only sound. His ranch was a lonely outpost on a vast, open plain, a small world of its own. As he tied up the horses, I found myself looking around, trying to piece together the life my father had lived here. Elias noticed my quiet contemplation. "The letter you sent," he started, his voice low. "You said you were looking for family." I swallowed hard, my nerves fraying. He leaned against the fence, waiting. I felt my hands tighten into fists, the frustration and grief coiling inside me. He took a half-step closer, then stopped, as if sensing a barrier he couldn't cross. "I'm his daughter," I finally said, the words hanging in the still air. Surprise flickered in his eyes, and for a moment, the wind itself seemed to hold its breath. "I see his fire in you," he said softly. That was all the opening I needed. "Then help me," I demanded. "Help me clear his name." Elias's expression hardened. "Be careful what you wish for," he warned. "The truth has teeth." Just then, a sharp whistle cut through the air. A rider was approaching, fast. Elias immediately shifted, his calm demeanor gone, replaced by a tense alertness. "Sheriff Barton." He dismounted, a dark, knowing smile playing on his lips. Elias moved without a second thought, positioning himself between me and the sheriff. "Heard you were asking about a letter," Barton said, his eyes fixed on me. Elias met his gaze, his voice firm and unwavering. "She's with me, Barton." The two men stared each other down, a silent battle of wills in the open yard. Finally, the sheriff tipped his hat in a cold, mocking gesture and rode away, leaving a trail of dust and unease. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "We don't have much time," Elias said, his eyes following the retreating figure. "Do you know something more?" I asked, my heart pounding. He didn't answer, just led me into the barn. The air inside was cool and smelled of hay and old leather. He knelt beside a large wooden chest, the hinges groaning as he opened it. From inside, he pulled out an old, rolled-up map, its edges frayed with time. He handed it to me. I looked from the map to his face. "Are you coming with me?" He met my gaze, his own filled with a resolve that startled me. "You're not going alone." He took off his hat, running a hand through his hair, the weight of the world seemingly on his shoulders. "There's something else," he confessed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your father. He didn't die in that mine collapse." I stared at him, my mind refusing to process the words. My whole body began to tremble. "I pulled him out," Elias admitted, stepping closer. "I was there." The world tilted on its axis. "Where is he?" I choked out, the question a desperate plea. Elias looked down, his face a mask of guilt and regret. Before he could answer, the sound of hoofbeats thundered outside, dozens of them. His head snapped up, his expression instantly serious. Shadows of men, Barton's men, danced across the barn walls. Elias grabbed my hand, his grip firm. "You have to trust me," he urged, his eyes locking with mine. He pulled open the back door of the barn as the sharp, metallic sound of rifle bolts snapping open echoed from the front. The shadows of armed men moved across the dirt yard. He looked deep into my eyes, his voice low and urgent. Double quotes. My panic spiked. I could see the men outside raising their guns. "Run!" he shouted, pulling me out the back and into the chaos. Bullets splintered the wooden boards of the barn just as we cleared it. The horses in the nearby corral spooked, their panicked whinnies filling the air as they scattered. Dust flew everywhere, choking me, blinding me. The storm finally broke after midnight, leaving the world washed in a quiet, silvery moonlight. Inside the cabin, the walls creaked and settled as the wind died down, and the fire in the hearth dwindled to a soft, ember glow. Caleb hadn't moved. He stayed seated beside the widow, his heavy coat still draped around her shoulders. His breath was steady, his eyes fixed on the door, like a sentinel carved from stone, watching over the fragile peace. It was nearly dawn when Nora finally stirred. She whispered, her voice so faint it was almost lost in the silence. "You stayed." Caleb didn't look away from the window, watching the first hints of light on the horizon. "Reckon I wasn't about to leave your life in the hands of a man who ain't worthy of breath." She sat up slowly, clutching the blanket tight. Her voice held a tremble he hadn't heard before. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was something closer to relief. I thought I'd have to face him alone. Caleb finally turned to her, and the hardness in his eyes softened. Ain't no soul in this land meant to carry everything alone, he said gently. Not even you. Nora lowered her gaze. She'd always been strong, fierce, unbreakable, or so everyone thought. Yet this man, this quiet cowboy, who had followed her through unimaginable danger without expecting a single thing in return, he saw the immense weight she tried so hard to hide from the world. He just let that simple truth settle between them, like dawn dust on old pine floorboards. Just as the horizon began to bleed with streaks of pink and orange, the sound of hoofbeats broke the morning quiet. Instantly, Caleb reached for his rifle, moving to position himself by the door. Nora stood a few feet behind him, her hand trembling slightly, though she tried to hide it. A voice called out from the yard, "Caleb Hayes. Widow Parker, you both alive in there?" Caleb eased the door open. Sheriff Dillard swung down from his horse, his tired eyes taking in the scene: the battered barn, the broken fence, the trampled snow. Two deputies sat on their horses behind him. "What happened here?" Dillard asked, though the answer seemed to hang heavy in the cold air, written on every face. Caleb lifted his chin, his voice firm. "Tom Greeley. He came for her." Nora stepped forward, her own voice steady now, but shadowed with the memory of it all. "He threatened my husband for months before he died. Folks didn't believe me. They said grief makes up stories out of the wind." Her breath hitched. "But Tom did it. He set the fire that took my barn. He killed my Ethan." The sheriff nodded slowly, his expression grim. "And last night?" "Last night," Caleb said, his voice low. Dillard glanced toward the dark line of trees at the edge of the property. "We tracked him. He's dead, about 2 miles east of here. Took off running but didn't make it far." He paused, his gaze landing on Caleb, studying him. "Bullet in his chest, a clean shot." Caleb said nothing. Nora stared straight at the sheriff, her voice barely a whisper, but clear. "Was it you, Caleb?" It wasn't an accusation. Sheriff Dillard let out a long, weary breath. "Self-defense. And heaven knows the man was wanted in 3 counties anyway." After a quiet moment, he added, "We'll write it up the right way." When the sheriff and his deputies finally rode off, the yard settled into a deep, peaceful stillness. Snowflakes began to drift from the gray sky, soft and gentle, like tiny blessings. Nora looked at Caleb, and there was something new in her eyes. The fear was gone, the raw grief was softer, replaced by a dawning clarity. "You didn't have to protect me," she whispered. Caleb just shook his head. "Didn't do it 'cause I had to." Later, they walked toward the corral to check on the horses. The morning sun was climbing, touching the mountain peaks with gold. For the first time, everything felt soft, almost tender. "Caleb," Nora asked quietly, her voice carrying on the crisp air, "why did you follow me at all? Why risk so much for a woman you barely knew?" He stopped beside a fence post, resting his gloved hands on the rough wood. His eyes drifted to a distant ridge, as if the answer was written there in the landscape. "Years back," he began, his voice low, "I had a wife, Clara, sweet as a spring rain. We had a little cabin down by the river. It was small, but it was ours." His breath hitched, just once, a flicker of pain he couldn't hide. "One night, I wasn't home. Trouble came to our door. A man. He took everything from her. I wasn't there. I wasn't there to protect the only person I ever truly loved." A profound silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of his words. Nora's throat tightened. "Caleb. That guilt," he murmured, his gaze still fixed on the horizon, "it ain't left me in 8 long years. When I saw you ride off alone that night, something in me just wouldn't let you be another person I failed to save." Nora reached out and placed a hand gently on his arm. The simple touch seemed to startle him more than a gunshot would have. "You didn't fail her," she said softly, her voice full of a deep, certain empathy. "And you didn't fail me." For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb let himself truly look at her. Not as a problem to be solved, not as a trail to be tracked, but as a woman standing before him, brave and broken and healing, all in the same breath. In the days that followed, an unspoken partnership formed. They worked side by side, repairing the fences the storm had broken, clearing the wreckage, and tending to the land together. Slowly, the ranch began to feel less like a place haunted by ghosts and more like a place finally freed from fear. One late afternoon, As the sun dipped low and painted the rolling hills in shades of copper and rose, Caleb saddled his horse. Nora stepped out of the cabin, a flicker of confusion on her face. "You're leaving?" Caleb nodded, his hands busy adjusting the reins. "Reckon your life's safe again, my being here." "Well, maybe I've overstayed my welcome." She walked slowly toward him, her boots crunching in the pale dust. "Caleb, don't talk like that. You've got a ranch to run," he said, avoiding her eyes, "a future to rebuild. You don't need a drifter hanging around, reminding you of hard nights. Is that what you think you are?" She whispered, her voice aching with the question. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and put his foot in the stirrup. But before he could swing himself into the saddle, Nora stepped closer. So close he could feel the warmth of her breath in the cold air. "Caleb, you followed me when I told you to leave me be." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "And I'm asking you, just this once, don't leave." His hands froze on the saddle horn. She swallowed hard, her voice as soft as dusk. "I don't need saving anymore. I don't you want to face the rest of this life without someone who understands what it costs just to keep going." Caleb blinked hard, the crushing weight of all his years of guilt and solitude seeming to settle and lift in the very same heartbeat. "You sure?" he whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. Nora nodded, a small, sure movement. "I'm sure." A new dawn was breaking. Caleb let go of the saddle, stepping down fully from the stirrup. He reached out his hand slowly, respectfully, and Nora met him halfway, her fingers lacing with his. The sun broke over the ridge, warm and full, lighting their faces in gold. For the first time in so many years, neither of them felt alone. This was a new beginning, rising from the ashes, a widow who had lost everything. A cowboy who had carried grief like a second skin. Two souls who never intended for their paths to cross, but who found something worth holding onto in the ruins of a storm. And as they stood there together, in the quiet dawn, Caleb whispered the words he never thought he'd say again. "I reckon this trail might just lead somewhere worth staying." The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and pine across the fields, gentle and full of promise, like the first breath of a life neither of them ever believed they would deserve again. The end of one trail, and the beginning of a new one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. We'll see you in the next one.